Welcome back to Synthesis with the School of Smirk. We're going to continue our conversation regarding the Greek transformation myth. This literary archetype that embodies that most crucial trajectory, that overarching and integral set of considerations, reflections, manifestations, and properties which the Greek god system, an abstract structure, art functioning as it particularly does to allow infinity to be included into expression, how this archetype passes this metaphysical message, information about the nature of the universe and humans as we fundamentally are, which is to be most beneficial. That archetype, which offers properties reflecting, tracking the potentials, capacities, conditions of the world and of ourselves, which are to be considered, which are relevant, and then which reflects those behaviors or that life experience which reflects and mirrors and tracks life without the thing being passed, then goes on to track and mirror, to reflect as isomorphic properties that type of behavior which reflects that which is being passed. And then through that overarching trajectory shows which of these two are find sympathy with the gods or the message itself being passed, the god system, sympathy or grace or giving from. That is, we're shown the benefits of having achieved this type of behavior, this degree of interaction, this type of life, which reflects um, reconciliation of the metaphysical message, that piece of information about the nature of the universe, which were being offered by the Greek god system. We'll see that it's this way, talking about things as fundamental relationships, as um, as being definite relationships, and yet those which may be uniquely interpreted meaningfully. Um, those which are specific but allow limitlessness to be included or found from and with them. We'll see that these are our bridge to Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. But first, we'll remember that Ovid names his articulation, his presentation of this entire god system, the entire abstract world and plexus of Greek mythology. He names it the Metamorphosis. That is from metamorphosi, meaning transformation. It is this transformation archetype which pervades all of these myths. It is the fundamental representation of the process and all of the most crucial attributes and structures of what's being offered, its effects, its manifestations, its implications, suggestions, purposes, benefits, and sources. That's what we're being shown here, um, and so he aptly names his epic representation of this world and the meaning that it passes. Um, I will say something short about my metaphysics recap um, before I recap the four steps, the four essential parts of this literary archetype. So, so message passing. Um, that is that it is reconciliation of infinity within the self, having been guided by metaphysical light of any kind, creations from the past. It is being guided by these metaphysical lights. It's being offered a path to reconciliation, justification of, and reconciliation of infinity, which shows us the type of behavior, a behavior reflecting that infinity, whether or not we've yet reconciled in this self, which shows us that it's when we come into an interaction which is not assuming, which is egoless, selfless, with anything of any type, state, or nature, according to the implications of that infinity, at that infinity, as all things in their truth are always irrefutably particular in their way of being related to an ever-changing set of others. That because of that, that uniqueness, that truth of each thing is always changing, and we can't assume about it. That in infinity, we are all united. We're all part of this one most miraculous wholeness. And so all things are to be praised. All things are to be found at one with self. And as this is true, the dissolution of our the destruction of our physical organism is not the end of self. We just change and become this same universe again in a different way. And so this is one of the many ways deathlessness is implied. And all of these things lead us to this ability to egolessly, selflessly come into interaction with anything of any type, state, or nature, as in infinity, all things of any appearance or nature or state or appearance um, or apparent definition are of equally limitless potential for meaning, truth, and value. Um, we come into an interaction which reflects this, which doesn't assume, which listens, not limiting things to us knowing their potential or their definition, their ability to be animate, their ability to speak to us, their meaning, their whatever it is. Coming into interaction which reflects infinity, which comes into an interaction selfless, giving, listening, unassuming with all others. And it's when we do this, that's what's revealed to us, is our irrefutably particular way of being related to the other. What we reveal is that way that we are related to them and they are related to us as a single thought, synergistic product. And as we are related selflessly, and that way selflessly is the way that we are related in the infinite plexus. What we do by choosing to be selfless, by using this infinity justified and the interaction reflecting it, what we do is we come into an interaction, we get to choose autonomously to come into an interaction with anything, so greatly widening our resources for substantial interaction. Therefore, interaction in infinity is any type of interaction is life itself, so increasing our potential for aliveness. Um, when we come into this selfless interaction, we reveal the synergistic product, which is the consciously witnessable truth of the self and the other during that interaction. What we see by giving the energy of our thought is the properties, the fundamental truths of self, the fundamental way that our properties and its properties are related. We see these appear as a conscious thought, and that thought is the irrefutably particular way we are related to the other and the other is related to us, as they only are in that moment, as all things are ever changing. And so what we reveal is not only something which was otherwise impossible and so miraculous, we reveal a truth which is shared by the self and the other. What we reveal is the unique light, the fruit of religion, that type of information received from the selflessness reflecting infinity, which is we reveal our shared truth with the other. That is, what is found, what is revealed to consciousness was otherwise impossible, and so what redefines all as adding a newness to a plexus in which all things are only what they are according to their irrefutable particular way of being related, redefines everything, including the self and the other. What we find revealed is a truth, which is a truth of consciousness, a consciously witnessable, meaningful energy arising between the two. The Holy Spirit, in fact, the thread which connects both of us in that plexus, which is both one aspect of my uniqueness, as my uniqueness is my irrefutably particular way of being irrefutably connected to all things in this web, this plexus of relationships. One of those threads, one thread in that web, is to this other that I've chosen to selflessly connect to. And that other is unique, irrefutably particular in its way of being related to all these other things. So also connected by endless webs of endless threads of relationships in the web of the infinite plexus ever changing. And yet there's one thread that we both have. And so by coming into this selfless interaction, we reveal in a way which is witnessable to consciousness the Holy Spirit, the air having gained the meaning which arrives from treating things as if they're sacred, as if they're in an infinite context. And this is that truth which we both share. And so we reveal the truth which is ours and the others. And this redefines it as having us within it, and us as having it within us. And this therefore transforms us into the other in one aspect, a sustainable connection with the other, which then results, of course, from this unique light received in our effortless casting out of this life, redefined ourselves, looking out upon the universe and watching as all things are redefined in their meaning, value, truth, consequence, potential, their relationships between each other. And we watch as the entire plexus shifts, is affected, is in its ever-changing flux, but in a way which is witnessable by our consciousness, as in this moment it is affected. And so we witness the spirit of the arising of the newness. It's redefined by the arising of the newness. And what we see is the spirit of it, but which is the truth of the other and the self combined, redefining all things. That value and that meaning granted is wisdom. It's the type of knowledge, the type of truth which arrives when we hold infinity within self, which is going to be relevant right now. So very interesting, and again, this is going to connect us to Vitruvian Man, but an archetype like this, a transformation archetype, I just gave you my synthesized conclusion. So as we look into these works, as we do, we have some idea of the goal we're seeking or the type of understanding we're pursuing. And we're using the works as ways to explain, ways to, by knowing where we're going, seeing the way that a work like this might be helping us to get there, that we might confirm this message by seeing it in the work, or come to better understand how all works, a vast breadth of resources from across human history, can help to guide us to confirm, develop, redefine, understand, reevaluate our own metaphysical understandings and how to use them most beneficially in our everyday lives. So an archetype like this, again, it's the overarching, the large structural set of properties which articulate the conditions to be considered, reflecting ways and the reflective, the absence of, and the benefits or overall goals of this thing, the type of thing that it's called. This is what we're shown, these overall structures which will pervade the entire God system, because this, the transformation, the metamorphosis, the self revealing the shared truth of the other as unique light through selflessness, is the overall goal. It's the utilization of the sources and conditions and capacities that are presented. It's the reason for the egolessness, the way reflecting. It is, and it is that newness, that all redefining truth, which is the reason why we find this beneficial, because it's a newness, it's an irrefutably particular way of being related, revealed to consciousness, which gives us all that we seek according to these capacities and conditions. It gives us reconciliation with the manifestations of infinity that we ever take account of. It gives us a sense of completeness and therefore relief from self-doubt, having seen what we are, knowing ourselves to always be in a condition of irrefutable particularity, ever changing. So our personas and opinions, our pre-definitions of self, we know, albeit unconsciously, to not be the truth of self, that the truth of self is ever changing. And so it completes us. It brings us into an interaction with more things and therefore a higher aliveness. It allows us to see more knowledge, more truth, more meaning, and therefore more purpose and potential and function. And these are all the things that we seek. And so the archetype, uh, the literary archetype, is a set of properties, fundamental relationships between abstract variables that pervade all of these myths. The main goal of this transformation to become the other, because it's what the God system aims to provide. It is the sympathy of the gods in step 4, and the grace of the gods, or the fulfillment of the wishes by begging to the gods, being fulfilled. This transformation is what we all seek. Um, and so it pervades all of these myths, but in doing so, just as any abstract structure, a canvas, the first to the last second of a piece of music or a film, um, just as a story starts and begins, just as a book starts and ends, whatever it may be, just as a dance begins and is concluded, these abstract structures are what allow us to perceive relative meaning within them. That is, we're able to see, because of, let's say, the size of a canvas, if the line, the very specific, definite thing drawn, is relatively large or small. That is, does it take up the entire size of the canvas? Does it cover half of it? Does it cover a very small portion of it? And that would be the relative meaning of that thing understood. We're able to receive relative meaning. We're able to understand a basic property, which mirrors our world, which allows us to understand it and its relationship to everything else in that context, by its being in an abstract structure. If that abstract structure changed and the line didn't change, it would change the meaning of the line. It's the exact same line, but inside of a different context, it changes its meaning. And so we see we need this abstract context in order to allow us to perceive relative meaning, to know that that's a small line and that's a big line. Or that line is 1/3 and that line is a half. And it's that relationship, which we'll see is the way that the world is seen, when having reconciled infinity in consciousness. It's the way that further that art then manages to express as properties tracked, mapped as relative meaning between abstract variables. And yet, because this is the same way that the world is, that the truth of the world is in an infinity including context, so this is the way which humanity has become able to express infinity, to include it in process and product, um, through art, through this way of treating the world as it treats its constitution, its abstract variables and relationships, is the same way that an infinity knowing person would interact with the approachable mundane. And in fact, because the world includes infinity, it is the truth of the world. This is the way the world is, as its irrefutably particular relationships, its irrefutably particular things, but only as relationships in an ever-changing circumstance. And so also art manages to allow for its definite properties to come into limitless truth, to reveal limitless meaning as it interacts with posterity, with every unique individual and conditioned posterity. Um, so we see that not only the entire God structure allows for each God to have its relative meaning, its properties become perceivable, but having an archetype, a literary archetype inside, which pervades all of the stories, it is included in them, allows us to see manipulation within, changes of focus or function within them. And we've talked about this, that, for instance, the Kyparissos myth, we can see a Greek transformation myth, which um, which itself focuses or passes a property, a piece of information about the type of subjects that might be included or enhanced, that might be sympathized by the gods. That is, that might be one of the things which is a beneficial effect of having reconciled or treating things according to infinity. It shows us that there are subjects um, like now not only loving the girl that shares the wall with you, which should be so easy, such an easy identification, but a stag can bring about the joy and the life um, which we're aiming for. That is, this is one of the devices, the means by having this character show you that love with an animal is, or love of something distinct from you, something which is apparently different, um, has something to do with this message. Um, which is why I chose this one in particular. It's a transformation myth, and yet it also is the one which includes the type of subject matter, those that increased metaphysical truth, which is that additional metaphysical truth taught, which is when you've reconciled this in consciousness, you will interact with all things, not just a thing just like you, easy to identify with, in a way which reflects that infinity. That is, anything of any state, type, or nature in infinity appearance has equally limitless potential. And so you'll find justification for coming into agape, into unconditional loving interaction with everything of every type of stone, a stag, a tree, a person of any type, appearance, whatever they may be, even an idea or a cloud. And it is this which is one of the benefits of what's being offered, and it's also a reflection of the metaphysical concept being offered. And so we'll see that not only the entire abstract structure, but having a smaller archetype within it, and even smaller archetypes within that, like the star-crossed lovers archetype, which we see inside of transformation myths, is what makes perceivable more and more details, more and more information, implications, suggestions, um, world reflecting, self mirroring properties that can help lead us to explain to us, guide us to seeing truths about this metaphysical message, general metaphysical message being passed. And so what we see is, for instance, like a variable added inside of any of these structures, a variable like a character, like Hermes in particular, um, is a way of showing us beyond what the basic archetype shows, beyond the capacities and conditions to be considered, beyond the ways reflecting and lacking, beyond the benefits and the sequence of behaviors towards the benefits, we're able to be shown that, oh, here is, through Hermes, a path that everyone can use to seeing a manifestation of the metaphysical message being taught in their everyday life, in the experience of indefinableness in every transition. That ultimately, if you go like this, there's one point where one hand begins and the other ends that we can never define. In the exchange of hands or the stealing of a thing, there's one moment where it's not one or the others, but both of theirs. There's an indefinableness in that. An indefinableness as the psychopomp between when are we alive and dead. There's some moment that's indefinable that we all can sense intuitively. Where is that point where uh, we stop being awake and we start being asleep? And all of these were shown through this variable added to this abstract context, um, the properties which map and mirror the transition, which in the abstract as a thought possesses indefinableness. Um, and so can lead us to seeing that, well, if there's indefinableness or boldness, that is an instance of infinity, the idea being taught in our reality. And um, so, too, another example, Athena, um, and with her Athena Noctua. So we can mention the accessories too, even smaller details, ever increasing variables inside of these structures. We can perceive that, oh, she is Sophia, or wisdom, we understand. And that for some reason this is associated with this owl. We could see inside of this transformation. How can what leads to transformation, sympathy of the gods and the granting of immortality and all of these beneficial things by the gods, with these conditions considered, how does wisdom, how does this brainchild work into that? And we can see that, oh, it's by interacting with the dark, as her Athena Noctua, her little owl, does. It's by seeing in the dark that we reveal wisdom. Okay, what does this mean? Well, it is this indefinableness embodied by Hermes, which is the irrefutably particular truth of each thing as a way of being related to all other things, but in an ever-changing context, which is the implication of the infinity being taught. And so it is the type of interaction which, having Zeus in the mind, having God or infinity in the mind, if we know the implications of infinity, have justified them, reconciled them itself, that we will come into interaction with the specific, the approachable things in our world, and yet in a way which sees them as art treats its constitution, which sees them as being irrefutably particular, specific, but reconciled with infinity. That is, as being relationships, no more than relationships to each other, defined, qualified as unique by these relationships, and yet to a context which is ever changing. And so we know that as we come into interaction with each thing, if we hold infinity in the mind, we'll treat that thing selflessly without assuming, because we know that its truth is changing and so is ours. We'll come to an interaction which does not assume about it, does not limit it, knowing all things of every type to have equally limitless potential. And when we do, what we'll reveal is that unique light, which is the shared truth, which transforms us into the other and the other in us, redefines both of us as that which occurred only in that unique moment of selfless interaction. We revealed the newness, the unique light, the fruit of religion, which is our irrefutably particular way of being related in that moment, one of the thread of both of our uniquenesses, but which is connected. We reveal our sustainable connection. We do the transformation, and that allows us to come into the interaction, to cast out the light of this newness, redefining us, which allows us to see the new values, meanings, truths of everything arise by our willingness to interact, to see, as the Athena Noctua, into the metaphysical dark, that is, the unknown, the invariable, unknown, indefinable in each specificity, to come into interaction with the world, which then, as we've received the unique light, as we've gone through the transformation, we look out and see as all things are redefined in light of this news. They all gain new meaning, as, again, all things are only what they are in their way of being related. And so adding a newness to that redefines all of them. And we see we gain new meaning, gain new functions, potentials, truths, significance for each and every other thing by this newness arriving. And um, that is the wisdom, that information received, that cascading flow of information and newness received, that information, which is the result of having had Zeus in the head, is, and having therefore had the brainchild, is what this is, the stuff that goes into the brain, the information received when interacting in a way which reflects reconciliation of infinity. Information received when interacting in the metaphysical dark, when interacting in a way which reflects infinity, reveals to the mind these newnesses, these new thoughts, which, just like the unique light, are wisdom. They are the information that arrives to the brain when interacting according to or in a way which reflects justification, reconciliation of infinity. And so is born wisdom of the brain, just like Athena is born of Zeus's brain. Um, these are the types of things, the types of increased implications, the development or expounding of the nature of um, ourselves in the universe we live in, according to what's being taught, which become possible through such an archetype, and are just like the archetype itself. They it uses fundamental relationships, just as reality does, in order to show the truth of things. And so we see, as we take the bridge over to Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, that Da Vinci saw what Vitruvius did as as rigorous scrutiny, a pursuit of truth at all costs, leading to him showing the ideal proportions of mankind, and that of our human physical structure, and that what he did, the way that he did it, the way that he expressed that definite, irrefutably particular truth, and yet about organisms which themselves are ever changing, was by fundamental relationships. This part of the body, this variable, is equal to two of these. And the distance between that and that, another variable, is equivalent to half of this. And so we see that all of these are irrefutably particular ways of being related inside of an abstract context. And that abstract context of the body, of the human organism, is something that's ever changing. And so Da Vinci sees in this articulation of the truth that there's an unprovability about it, and yet it is absolutely true. He sees that the way that Vitruvius is driven to rigorously scrutinize the organism for the sake of encyclopedic truth or function or correct or ideal representation is also the way that art sees its world, that art manages to express, and also the way that infinity brings us to interact with the world and makes the truths of the world qualified. That the world, if we use guidance like the transformation myth to reconcile infinity and self, the world is realized to be an irrefutable set of relationships which are ever changing, which makes us willing, like the Athena Noctua, to come into interaction with the metaphysical dark and to reveal the unique light which will again transform us, rebirth us, give us salvation, just like our characters in the transformation myths. That this set of relationships ever changing, which we see, which by their ever changing relationships reveal to us ever new meaningful properties, which are rebirthing meaning, is also the way that art treats its constitution, that its truths are preserved as energetic variables and their ways of being related that are definite, and yet which can map and track infinity, which can allow infinity into their creation process, and which can, once preserved, come into what is invariably, irrefutably particular, specific, otherwise impossible interactions with each organism in posterity, just as the structure itself is definite and it's true, and it's found uniquely as a truth within each otherwise impossible organism, which can't be intended. And what we see is that what he's doing, he's reconciling this rigorous scrutiny, this truth about this truth scientific, this attempt to fix or make finite definite truths to what we can hold in consciousness. And he's reconciling it with a world which has infinity within it, a world seen through the lens which knows all of its specificities to be part of an infinite plexus. And that art is the middle place which manages to be that specific function which allows humanity to include this infinity into expression, exactly because it treats its variables in the way that the world finds its meaning and truth in a way reconciled with infinity. And so we see that he gives us an inscription, this way of seeing truth, as a set of fundamental properties and relationships between variables inside of the abstract context, the body in this case, the body and the framework, the entire framework. That is, the words also are, in his work, the words are actually those are abstract variables. And so are the symbols of the circle and the square. And we see that what he's doing is showing us that this is the way that art works, in the same way that these words are articulating truth. And because of that, because he represents the man and these two symbols inside of the artwork, which is itself explicitly showing us what type of truth it passes and how it manages to pass it, he also shows us that we're not supposed to just understand something about an ideal proportions of man, that he's not just jotting this down for to scribe and pass again these ideal proportions, but rather to tell us something about art. And what he's telling us about art is also his message. He wants to tell us the most beneficial message, passed through and learned through the transformation myths, about humanity, that it's not just ideal proportions that are embodied and shown here. He shows us that this is the way to look at art. And if we look at art in this way, if we look at his work in the way that he's showing us to, in the way that we might look at the abstract context of a body in order to understand its ideal truth, we can find an ideal way of being or understanding ourselves in the universe we're in. And he shows us that it's when we combine, when we reconcile and put humanity and its potential inside of this, um, inside of both a circle, that is the symbol inside of art. The circle is a symbol in the any abstract context. The circle is a symbol of endlessness or infinity, like the Ouroboros or the ring in the marriage sacrament, or the Stephani in the Greek marriage. All circles. These embody infinity. These show us an endlessness or a limitlessness. These represent and reflect and mirror and track this for the humanity, which is ever taking account of the fact that there are things beyond self, that there's things beyond our consciousness, that there's things we don't understand, that there's limitlessness and indefinableness and enigma and boldness, duality. And so he not only includes that, but the square, the symbol of finite lines which have definite ends, which have definite angles, and yet which, when reconciled, that is specificity, square, finite truth, the work of Vitruvius, is reconciled with the circle, the infinity, which the artist uses art to include into process and product, whether explicitly or just as the embodiment of irrefutable particular light, which itself is limitless, and so infinity including. It's when we combine these two, when we combine the infinite with the specific, when we reconcile the two, when we reconcile the two by realizing that the irrefutable particularity we see in self and all other things is only a way of being related, just like Vitruvius' understanding of the parts and shapes and distances, the proportions of a body. And that in infinity, this way of being related, this truth, is ever changing. It's when we realize that we've reconciled the two, that we're willing to come into interaction in the way that's not the ideal form, but the ideal manner of interacting for our species, the species which in particular is aware of infinity and uniqueness. We come into the interaction which is both with the specific, knowing it to be irrefutably particular, which walks out into our world and approaches anything of any type, state or nature or appearance, antagonism, harmony, whatever it is. We approach it, but knowing that it's limitless, knowing that ultimately it has an equally limitless potential for meaning, truth, and consequence, and function and purpose. And it's when we do that that we reveal, by our selfless interaction, aware of the circle, with the square, with the finite and definite, we reveal our irrefutably particular way of being related to another. That we see it just as Vitruvius saw the parts of man, the structure, the proportions inside of the abstract context of the body. We see the truth of ourself and the other as they are irrefutably particularly related, as art sees its constitution and manages to pass and mirror the world in an infinity including way. And that is the unique light revealed, which transforms us, which therefore grants us all of the benefits and relieves us of all of the pain, which is the function of God's systems, and shown in the archetype as the sympathy of the gods, the giving of the wishes of the gods for mankind. This is all being passed. This is all being shown in many different ways with different focuses from different aspects and different functions. This is all being shown to guide us to seeing the value of reconciling God in the mind. That is, to finding a way to justify and act according to infinity. God being whatever the biggest thing is, the infinity, the wholeness, the largest idea, metaphysical information, which is most beneficial to our species in particular, the one that's aware of uniqueness, and the seemingly contradicting infinity, which all we have to do is reconcile, which will bring us into our ideal state of interaction and aliveness with the world, which reveals the unique light which transforms us into the other, which gives us sustainable connection, redefines itself, grants us new meaning, shows us our manner of being reconciled, our manner of being connected in the infinite plexus that at times we feel isolated from, relieves us of the self doubt that we always have um, in this ever changing, in this world in which we recognize these external factors and forces uncontrollable manifestations of infinity, and then allows us to receive the increased interaction, therefore the increased aliveness, human particular, that is the one particularly available to the species with these capacities by having engaged both the square and the circle. And so to watch as all things are redefined in light of this newness revealed, in light of that which transformed us into the other. Um, Therefore, granting us the meanings, the values, the truths, the new functions, the new potentials, the new implications of all the things around us in this cascading psychological flight, paradise on earth, which is that which is the receipt of the wisdom, Athena, Sophia, receipt of the wisdom that is from our willingness, having reconciled those two, to fly as the Athena Noctua, the little owl, in the metaphysical dark, in the unknown, in the that is in interaction with the world, but in a way which knows that we cannot define or limit its truths. That its truths and the truth of each thing within it hold a metaphysical darkness, hold our unconscious waiting to be revealed to consciousness. Um, and that we can do this by using any manifestations or paths to the truth, to the reflections, manifestations of the infinity in our world. Dualities, like the ocean is the ocean, and it's also endless droplets of water. Hermes transition, that in every transition there's a place of indefinableness. In paradoxes, that there's this strange loop, this boldness, or endlessness, or duality in things. Whatever path we take, it's all for this purpose. We're being guided to find paths, to see the resources available to us, to see the relevant conditions and capacities in self, to see the types of behaviors which would reflect this thing beneficial being passed, so that we might attempt them, even and invariably not yet being able to autonomously hold the concept being passed, that we might reflect them and so receive the sympathy of the gods, receive the use or the benefit, that is, of holding such a concept within self, which is that which will transform us into the others, that which will grant us new life, grant us immortality, that is, reveal the unique light which we could record as the word written, which we could articulate as an irrefutably particular set of relationships, properties, qualities preserved in the abstract world, in art, in literature, and so actually allow the self, this truth of self, which as energy is equivalent to anything else in the infinite, is equivalent to our physical reality, and so allow us to come into a real interaction, as any interaction of any kind is aliveness in infinity, and so to live immortally, to come into interaction with otherwise impossible conditions in the future with unique selves there. Um, and so we have the archetype, we have the transformation archetype, we have Ovid telling us this is the metamorphosis. What is being shown to you in all of these, in this entire abstract world, which I will articulate the entirety of, is shown to you, and the purpose is to make the transformation. And all of the characters and all of the focuses and all of the things I leave out and all of the things I include, and every turn of phrase and every rhyme through which you might memorize and so carry this information with you, and everything is just a function and a device to help you see more, from more angles, from more aspects, with more suggestions and implications and support and confirmation, how to find your way to understanding this overarching path and sequence and message, this overarching use and synthesis of these truths about the nature of the universe and of humanity, which might help you to get to the end goal, to acting autonomously, not by force, in a way which reflects infinity, in a way which reflects reconciliation of infinity, and so to come into the egoless and selflessness, which gives you the sympathy of the gods, which gives you the grace or divinity of the gods, which allows your prayers to be fulfilled. And that is only to say, to act in the way which reflects infinity, and so to gain the benefits that we all seek. And so the archetype, quickly again, is at the beginning of every one of these stories are proposed, are offered to us in one way or another, those things to be considered, relevant conditions. We're shown that love is significant and present, that it's wanted and valued. We're shown that the humans are using a god system, that there are gods involved in this. We're shown that there are factors and forces beyond our control, that there are feuds between parents, that there are reasons to go visit an oracle, that they must go out on the sea, whatever it may be. We're shown that there are conditions beyond our control. We're shown that there are god systems that people are using to cope with things or to enhance their lives, whatever it may be. And we're shown that there is love. We're shown that there is some sort of connection which is valued. We're shown these things, and we're shown this is what you need to look at. This is what you need to work on synthesizing. These are the factors that you should be considering as you go through the rest of this tale and all of these tales. And so we go into the next step, the second step, during which there is some sort of conflict, some sort of negative thing is presented by these external influences, like Eros. Apollo falls in love with Daphne and begins chasing her. She flees because she, according to the previous god system, a love and a god system, both in that first step, which we realize are unfounded, that they don't, the character doesn't understand why they're there. They value them, they know they exist, but they don't yet act according to them. And so we're shown in the second step, set into conflict, where, for instance, Kiparisos accidentally stabs his beloved stag, or where Pyramus mistakenly thinks he's found the bloody cloak of Thisbe, where it's just a misinterpretation, and he stabs himself. We're thrown into this conflict. We see all of these characters not acting according to the utilization of the god system, not acting according to an understanding of the source of the love that they have and value. Showing, nevertheless, that they value their oaths, they want to protect the love, they want to use or preserve their god system or their chastity, whatever it is. Just like Alcyone is putting forth so many tributes to the gods to give her a sense of comfort with sex out on the water. Just like in all of these, we see that there's a value in this love, and that there's a use or the existence and an apparent function of this god system, but that neither of them be our gauge. That still, in this second step, we're fleeing, we're experiencing pain, we're killing ourselves, we're wanting to, we're mourning, we're suffering, we're fleeing. That there's this horrible, tense, painful, isolated condition in this second step, where those factors and forces beyond our control in the world have set us into a state of ego isolation, that we're trying to control and manipulate, that we're trying to use our own strength and our conscious minds and our intent in order to control things, despite there being the presence of this love value, which is emphasized here, and this consequence, this causality of the beyond self, and also this awareness of the god system established. It is then in the third step that the character, for whatever reason, And in this case, it's by extreme circumstances. Extreme circumstances which function as a device to give the reader the additional empirical evidence that energy itself, the energy which is written into the story, the thought of Ovid, is actually affecting you thousands of years later. That you seeing this misinterpretation of the cloak, that you knowing this death at sea, or the power of a dream, or the hopelessness of having accidentally stabbed something that you love, all of these, you feel this within self, and the author uses that as a function to give you empirical evidence of the energy equivalence, which is an implication of the message, the infinity being taught. So with all of this and with these extreme circumstances, which not only show that and emphasize the pain and struggle of the way of life which lacks the infinity being taught, drives through exhaustion, through desperation, through an exposure to a lack or a loss of the love, which then shows that it is love itself, which is life, teaching another implication that we'll go over of the infinity being taught. So driven by extreme circumstances, for one reason or another, in one of these reasons or another, the character finally decides to stop attempting ego control, to stop attempting to manipulate their resources, to stop attempting to intend and act in this way which does not reflect infinity, and they begin acting in a way which reflects infinity, although not by having reconciled that infinity, that's the goal, rather by being forced to, by coming to believe that they've given all of that they can. Exhausted, Daphne begs her father, Peneus the river god, to be transformed. Knowing, not able to revive, and watching his stag bleed out, Kiparisos begs to the gods. In all of these cases, Alcyone the same, they beg to the gods. That is to say, and again, these are fundamental properties of relationships drawn between abstract energetic variables mirroring something in the world. But the begging to the gods, the giving up in these instances, in this third step, is the coming into interaction, because it's still them, and it's coming into interaction, and it's by choice. I mean, although it was forced, it's still them choosing to do this, to come into interaction with the world which reflects infinity. That is, it begins to interact with that which is beyond self. It begins to call out to gods they can't see. It begins to beg and reach and look out and see trees that they want to be turned into. It begins to reflect interaction selfless, that doesn't assume about anything, that just hopes and prays, that begs, that has given up, that is the self choosing to come into an interaction with the world, which reflects an awareness that all things are ultimately indefinable, that things are beyond self, and that those things, as is the implication of infinity, there's no reason to assume about, that even the thought of a god can interact with us, that anything has an equally limitless potential. They begin to speak to the world. That is, they begin to treat the world, the beyond self embodied by the gods, the manifestations of infinity, the things themselves, should they, according to infinity, be limitless, in fact, begins to interact with the world in a way which reflects infinity. That is, they come into an egoless, selfless, by force and extreme circumstances, of course, but they do, and we can see this, come into this selfless interaction with the world around them, and in a way which reflects the inclusion of the beyond self. They speak to the gods. And it's this which elicits the sympathy of the gods. This makes the gods sympathize with them. This makes infinity begin to work for them, that is. It's this egoless and selflessness, even though they didn't have proof of it yet. And that's always the case, because you can't be proven or shown or explained infinity. It's ultimately indefinable. It's ultimately unspeakable. And so you have to find it using guidance like this. And so we get into this third step, and it's this egolessness by whatever way. And hopefully it's by guidance. Hopefully it's by us being guided and shown by metaphysical light, by artists, by creators, by prophets, not by some extreme, horrifying circumstance, not having gone through life in this struggle and this pain, but rather shown a way towards this selflessness because we can see, hey, if we always have these capacities at the beginning, we don't have to go through this whole thing. We could just choose to be selfless. We could choose to act in a way which reflects whatever the gods want. We could act in the way that the gods want. And when we do, we receive the sympathy, the graces, the we're fulfilled in our wishes and our prayers by the gods when we act in this way. And so we could see that, in other words, when we act according to what's being taught, to what the gods are there to teach, to what they represent, therefore to what they sympathize with and agree with, we get the benefits of holding infinity. We get the benefits of having reconciled infinity in our lives. And that's when, and as is the case of the story, we transform. Step 4. Having received the sympathy of the gods, we are transformed, having given up and said that we'll give our lives for another, having given up and said that we would rather die with our love than live, having given up and said that we'll do anything to keep sacrificing for our mistake or our loss or whatever it is. This is acting in the way, this acting egoistically, selflessly, sacrificing, and so is the way which reflects infinity, and therefore is the way which is beneficial. And in that moment of giving, just like what we discussed, that's going to be the interaction with the world around us, which reveals the unique light, which transforms us into the other. It reveals the shared truth, our irrefutably particular way of being related to the other, which is therefore the way that we are in the infinite plexus, ever changing, selflessly. And that reveals to us what they are, what we are, consciously and unconsciously. It reveals from the metaphysical dark the truth that is shared, our one aspect of our uniqueness in that moment. And this is what initiates the benefit of all of these things. The benefit of the gods, that is, the benefit of receiving unique light, revealing wisdom when in interaction with everything else, the psychological flight cascading, which is the arrival of all this additional truth and meaning, this interaction highest, this reconciliation, this relief from self-doubt, this redefinition of self, this awareness of our individuality or uniqueness. And so this is the transformation, which is the final step, which also, having received unique light, allows us to preserve or pass or spread that unique light. And therefore, for instance, to write a story about something that we saw when in selfless interaction with the tree, like a cypress tree, to write a story about that and allow it to come, as Ovid does, into interaction with all of posterity, and as interaction in the infinity which leads to this transformation of any kind is aliveness itself. So we are able to live immortally. We're able to, as the unique light, which according to infinity, the energy of thought is as real as anything else, as has an equally limitless potential for meaning and value and truth. So the energy of self, unique light, when it's preserved, is the self. And it is able to come to real interaction or aliveness, that is, the self is able to be alive in conditions of posterity in interaction with them eternally. As long as there is posterity, there is this interaction. And so these characters who go through the transformation are able to live, to do what they wish to do immortally, to be with their beloved, whether it's flying as the kingfishers together, whether it's turning into the cypress so they can mourn, whether it's turning into the laurel who droops at Apollo's true love, which is the salvation, their salvation by the gods, the receipt of all the benefits that we need of immortality, of nourishment, of relief from pain. And so this is the synthesis of Vitruvian Man with Kyparissos and all of the other transformation myths of the Greek tradition as presented by Ovid in the Metamorphosis, the transformation from metamorphosis. And we see that it's the invariable taking account of that all humanity has done of these beyond self truths, the indefinable, the uncontrollable, the unknowable factors and forces of our reality, which the God systems, the God system that exists, again, these are from the first part of the first step of the four, are there to offer relief from, to give us a sense of, we can sacrifice or we can do sacred rite, to give us a sense of connection to these things which are apparently so different than us. It's these God systems which are not only supposed to do that, the first function of religion, to give us a sense of reconciliation with these beyond self factors and forces by sacred right, by the offering, some magical offering, giving us a sense that we're on the good side of these things that cause us so much doubt. Um, but then also the second function that we can begin to, as we develop these God systems, as we come to find implications of duality, the implications of our being in infinite context across generations, we can begin to see that not only not only is this real psychological effect of sacrificing or sacred rite or offering to these things beneficial in that it relieves us of a sense of fear and isolation, self-doubt, and so gives us the more energy with which to interact with the world. But that also that this implies that all things, as with these other implications, all things have equally limitless potential for meaning and value and function. That all things of every type are equal in this manner. That nothing is more real or less real or more potential holding than anything else. That all things are what they are irrefutably particular only by their way of being related. We only are what we are not. We only are ourselves by, as and by our way of being related to a set of things which, if it's infinite, is always changing, is ultimately indefinable. And so we're shown that it is these things which we can recognize, as in the indefinableness and Hermes in our everyday transactions. Um, or message passing, the consequence of the sound of a voice or words written. We can find justification for our being in an infinite context. And so come into the interaction, the degree of interaction selfless, which reflects the implications, at least enough to try it, reflects justification of the implications of this infinity, at least enough to try it in interaction, to come to interaction selfless with something else, and so to reveal the unique light, which itself is the valuable thing. That is, to treat something else selflessly, to act according to the infinity that there's so much evidence of, to use the God systems to guide us and encourage us to doing so, to seeing the potential benefits. And so to reveal the unique light, which itself as a newness is the thing of value. That is the thing which reveals increased truth of self, increased meaning, which redefines self, and so allows us to witness all things redefined, which therefore reconciles us with infinity and gives us our own autonomous path to understanding how it appears. And it is this which, again, gives us that autonomous path. It's this finding infinity through this selflessness, finding that there's such benefit to having reconciled this concept, finding paths and increased confirmation of and justification of the ways of acting according to it and its nature. Um, there's such nourishment from this that we start to see, especially from that thing that we're in selfless connection with, and all these other things that are now justifiably worth connection with. That we realize everything, even antagonistic, energetic, invisible, whatever it is, all of these things we have equal justification for coming into selfless interaction with. And as that unique light so valuable is revealed, it's this value, this rebirth, and this increase in information and knowledge and truth and meaning and consequence which we receive, which is what then produces that love. That's also from the first step. That's what makes us give the love, which is actually a type of focus. Love is agape, an unconditional love and giving, an unconditional focus on something else, which arises in us when we, for instance, find that our interaction with the thing reveals to us this truth of self otherwise impossible, so nourishing, so redefining, so meaningful, so meaning granting, so reconciling, so transformative. It's when we reveal this unique light, even by trusting the God system to help us deal with these uncontrollable external factors and forces, that we reveal the unique light, which is so valuable that we look with love, we look unconditional giving to this thing which gave so much to us, and we realize, according to infinity, that this love can be with and for every different type of everything in each moment. That having been redefined, we can watch all things redefined and have our own autonomous path to infinity. And so to come to love and to spread this love with everything, it's it's shown as an existing potential, just like the egolessness later. It's shown as an existing potential, but without a source. at the beginning. It's shown, hey, we're going to figure out why this is here and why this is significant. And just as with the star-crossed lover story, we realize that we experience this love by accident. We fall in love. That is to say, we we have the potential for this unconditional giving, just like we have the potential for the selflessness and egolessness in step 3. We have the potential for this focus, complete and unconditional, just like with the Virgin Mother. Um, we we experience it without foundation, without source, because we come into interaction with, as facilitated, as we said in the Star Lover story, this love is often found because we have such ease of identification with something. That is, when someone like Thisbe and Priamus share a wall, and Thisbe is the greatest beauty in the East, the fairest one, and you grew up with her, it's very easy to find ways to identify with her. It's very easy to feel sympathy or to be selfless when in interaction with her. You can very easily, without any justification, without any concept reconciled in mind, without any supporting perspective, find a reason to be selfless, to feel at one with, or to therefore act in ways which reflect infinity, but which in fact are not generated by infinity, with Thisbe. And it's this giving, this selflessness when in interaction with anyone or anything, but in this case with Thisbe, with someone who is easy to identify with, which is our being selfless in interaction with them. And what that reveals is the unique light. It transforms us into them. And it gives us all of these benefits. All of a sudden, by seeing them, the world is transformed. All of a sudden, there's bluebirds flying around, and there's like more light, and you can see like the different things that you've never seen before. This is the experience of falling in love. But this is in fact the result of the unique light being revealed. Yourself redefined. You feel like you're reborn. You're like alive again. There's music in your ears. Everything is great. It's the experience of paradise on earth, having accidentally, without foundation, without control, without autonomy, received unique light by the ease of identification with another person. Someone so similar to you, lives right next to you, born the same day, and shares all your same traditions and everything else, and is beautiful to you. It's this which causes the ease of identification, which reveals the unique light accidentally, unintentionally, which redefines us, gives us all the benefits that God would otherwise give us, and yet we don't know why. And because of it, when we receive that nourishment, we fall in love with the other person. We say, whoa, this is deserving of unconditional focus and love. I got everything that I needed. Now I'm just totally focusing on this thing. There's literally no hesitation, not that there was much before, but now there's not. And they become the beloved, but they become a single beloved, and one that's not autonomously sourced. And because of this, we are subject to this condition of loss of love, or loss of soul, as in the bush soul, having found identification with a tree or an animal. Um, we we therefore see that really devolve and be, in a way, a waste, or at least the effect of not having the source, not knowing the source of that love, not knowing the source of that love as selflessness leading to the unique light which reconciles us and grants us meaning and rebirths us. um, that value, that it's the newness revealed by selflessness, which gives us all the things that we need as a species, which particularly are aware of uniqueness and infinity. And that's what drives us to love the thing. And the idea is that through this process, we'll learn how the God systems that exist, and this one that these God systems spoken of is within, how these external factors and forces to be considered, which are manifestations of infinity, and how the love, which is the arrival of the unique light, which is the transformation to be sought, the love is the reflection of that unique light which transforms us, um, which is something that we should be able to choose, just like the egolessness and selflessness we should be able to justify. Um, Thank you for joining me in synthesizing these massive works. Um, and I hope to see you for another episode of Synthesis with the School of Smirk.